The official notice boards called her borough a literacy-free advancement zone, but everyone just said Dust District because the drab concrete towers collected grime like a second skin. The ministry had banned all written language 12 years earlier, after claiming that words caused dissent by making people stare inward instead of forward. They replaced books with loop propaganda chants, replaced street signs with color codes, and rewrote public memory until citizens believed they had never leaned over bedtime pages or scribbled love notes. In daylight hours, armed auditors prowled for contraband letters, ripped labels off cans, ground school slates to powder, and even lasered the faded names off grandparents' headstones. Every scrap of alphabet was an act of treason, punishable by timed exposure to the forgetting lights. 16-year-old Kez Rami kept a dictionary's worth of treason under her fingernails. Thin, nimble, always moving like a flame looking for new oxygen, she corkscrewed up elevator shafts of condemned skyscrapers to paint words no one was supposed to recognize. By day, she delivered factory lenses, weaving through checkpoints with a messenger's neutrality. By night, she carried a satchel of pressurized ink cartridges and a coil of repurposed rope, the tools that turned her into night stinging, the ghost tagger whose murals glowed in moonlight, then faded to dust at sunrise. Until recently. Her latest project was different, a sprawling narrative stitched across 8 adjoining high-rise shells the ministry had walled off after an earthquake. From ground level, the letters looked like abstract geometry, but from a distance, a fluent eye could find sentences snake through cracked columns, across shattered windows, down elevator wells. The story she hid there was an old folk tale her grandmother used to whisper before the raids began, the one about the Phoenix Library, where books grew feathers at night and flew to readers in need. Kez painted it in modular fragments, each panel ending mid-thought so the next tower carried the continuation. She called it Skyline Chapter. Painting was never enough. The real art was keeping the words alive inside people who had never learned to read. So, while her hands sprayed pigment, her mind rehearsed how she would perform the tale orally to her younger brother Milo at dawn, rewriting each cadence so it would lodge in memory. Everyone said stories were only safe if you swallowed them, turned them to bone, or risked the auditors scraping them off your skin. One humid midnight, as Kez balanced on a billboard frame 20 stories up, she heard footsteps echo up the stairwell that should have been silent. She clipped her paint cartridge, ready to bolt. But the stranger who emerged carried no shock pike. Instead, he hauled a battered field recorder large as a shoebox. He looked maybe 20, with startled eyes that switched from fear to fascination when he saw the labyrinth of sentences unraveling behind her. "Your night sting," he spoke the outlaw code as if spitting hot soup. "I'm Rune. I don't read, but I can listen." Kez didn't answer. Trust was a myth that got taggers cuffed. Rune lifted the recorder. "I program audio loops for the ministry daily quotas of I can steal frequency time. If you give me your story, I'll beam it to every public speaker in Dust District at midnight. Replace the doctrine with dreams," she snorted. "And have the auditors triangulate you before the first paragraph ends? Good luck, boy." But Rune's proposition burrowed under her resistance. For years, Kez had watched guards whitewash murals before dawn. Their erasure left her shouting into emptiness. Broadcasting might spread the tale faster than paint could dry. Still, sound alone wasn't enough. She wanted people to see letters and maybe, just maybe, admit they recognized them. Sight plus sound could rip the seal off collective memory. They parted without agreement, yet the seed had sprouted. Over the next 3 nights, she painted harder, swathing walls in interlocking motifs. Feathered books mid-slight, children writing volumes instead of broomsticks, elderly librarians stitching constellations into open pages, and beneath every image she wrote tiny trigger glyphs, designed not only to be read but to react. Trigger glyphs were rumored technology from before the banned quantum pigment, laced with piezoelectric dust, that stored kinetic charge during day heat, then released it when urban temperatures dipped. Kez had scavenged a vial from an old research lab the ministry never fully gutted. Mixed into paint, the particles could convert air vibration into audible resonance. In simpler terms, the letters could speak for themselves. On the fourth night, she finished the final comma and felt a tremor under her palm, a barely audible hum gathering in the concrete. She stepped back, heart punching her ribs. Nothing more happened. Maybe that was for the best, she thought, because if words began to talk, they might also betray her. The next evening, a dust storm cloaked the city. Street lamps became dull halos, perfect cover for a hush run. Kez scaled the central tower to photograph her work before the wind erased pigment. Halfway up, she heard voices through the gale, hundreds of them, whispering the sentences she'd painted, the syllables stitched into the wind itself. Each phrase ended with the rustle of turning pages. Her murals were reading themselves aloud. She crouched against the railing and almost wept. But awe snapped to alarm when sirens gnashed below. Spotlight beams carved the night as patrol drones spiraled up. She climbed higher, merging with shadows, and watched auditors swarm the plaza. Instead of launching net grenades, they simply pointed floodlights at the walls. Kez saw their faces, some perplexed, others terrified. They could not arrest a building. The voices continued until dawn. Then, as sun bled across rooftops, the pigment dulled to chalk silence. The auditors taped hazard lines, muttering about acoustic anomalies. They ordered demolition mechs to tear down the outer facades. In 8 hours, the narrative would be rubble. Kez fled home, the taste of defeat acidic. Milo sat on their pallet bed knitting copper wires into toy insects. She tried to smile, but he sensed the gloom. "Did you run out of night?" he asked. She nodded. "Maybe tomorrow," she whispered, telling herself more than him. A knock rattled the door. Kez grabbed a pry bar, signaled Milo to hide, and opened a sliver. Rune stood there, rain-soaked, clutching his recorder like a severed heart. "I captured last night," he said. "The buildings told the whole story. Listen." He pressed play. The recorder projected not only the words but flutters of phantom feathers, distant laughter, the hollow echo of library atrium's layers no human tongue had supplied. The pigment had made its own orchestra. "I can broadcast this tonight," Rune said. "They'll never trace because it's everywhere now, inside every structure coated with that dust." Kez stared. "The auditors are demolishing the site." "Doesn't matter," Rune insisted. "Sound is portable. Once people hear, they'll remember that they remember." His conviction ignited her. Kez hauled out her remaining cartridges. "We need more triggers. If buildings can talk, imagine trains, street bikes, tea kettles." Over the next 12 hours, they formed a crew. Kez, Rune, Milo despite her protests, and 3 scrapyard twins who could climb like lizards. They mapped transit tunnels, factory floors, water towers, any surface that touched thousands of lives daily. Milo modified his copper insects into micro-drones, each carrying a capful of trigger paint. When night crashed in, they scattered across Dust District, sewing letters in snatches, single words at first: remember, open, breathe. On bigger canvases, they wrote phrases, truncated mid-sentence, so listeners would crave completion. Each glyph glowed briefly, then sealed itself, invisible, safe from daylight snoops. At 1:00, the ministry's mandatory chant started as usual, monotone loops about productivity and obedience. At 1:03, the chant hiccuped. Through every speaker cracked a gentle voice. "Let me tell you about wings made of page edges." Then another. "Once, you kept worlds beneath your pillows." An avalanche of alternate narration cascaded, mixing folk memory with factory instructions in mischievous juxtapositions. Across the district, people froze, spoons half raised, welding arcs paused mid-spark. Some clamped hands over ears, terrified of illegal sound. Others let it soak their chests. In apartment 8E, a grandmother repeated the sentences aloud and realized she still remembered how vowels rolled off tongue. Tears baptized the kitchen floor. The ministry's central monitor launched jamming waves, but the story hopped frequencies, ricocheting across metal beams laced with trigger dust. Every object able to vibrate became a speaker. Manhole covers hummed. Neon signs flickered an iambic meter. Even the litter of mince labels reassembled itself through residents, projecting ghost phrases on alley walls. The auditors panicked. Laws were forged for people, not for talking architecture. They sealed checkpoints, yet the checkpoint gates themselves began citing bylaws from band charters, reminding guards that civil power derived from consent. It was as if the city had remembered its own birth certificate. Amid the chaos, Kez's crew regrouped in an underpass lit by failing strobes. Rune's recorder was busted. The story now self-propagated. Milo's drones perched overhead like metal fireflies. The twins reported uprisings near the rail hub. Workers refusing to mute speakers until the tale concluded. Kez knew the ministry's next move would be brute, city-wide blackout, maybe thermite to melt the towers. She inhaled dust-scented air that buzzed with consonants, and made a decision she'd feared since sketching her first illegal letter. "We need to show our faces," she said. "Words have voices. They need bodies." The others stared. Anonymity had been their shield. But Kez felt a swell like the tide belly lifting a boat, the realization that legacy mattered more than safety. They headed for the plaza where the demolition mechs were still set to raise the original murals. Thousands had gathered there, hearing rumors that Nightsting might appear. Some carried pots whose rims whispered rhymes. Others hoisted unplugged television sets, droning fairy tale fragments. Drones hovered overhead, projecting ministry warnings. But even the drone's metal arms jittered with fractions of the Phoenix story they'd been painted mid-slight by Milo's insect. Kez climbed atop a pile of quake debris. When floodlights found her, instead of fleeing, she unfolded a sheet of silver insulation film. Across it, she'd painted 5 crisp sentences in scarlet. Gasps rippled. People recognized the shapes, though their tongues stumbled. She spoke. "This is reading. It's not poison. It's remembering." Someone shouted, "Teach us." Auditors at the Corton loaded stun cartridges. Rune stepped forward, arms raised, broadcasting amplified alphabet recitations through hacked loudhailers, so every letter he described echoed from walls in prismatic resonance. The ground itself began scrolling luminous glyphs like magma under asphalt. A frontline guard, maybe no older than Kez, dropped his rifle when the word mercy shimmered at his boots. He whispered it, felt its syllables taste like first water, and joined the crowd. The cordon fractured. Ministry overlords activated the forgetting lights, towering pylons that fired pulsed brightness engineered to scramble neural pathways associated with symbolic memory. 3 pylons blinked on the skyline, charging blue-white. Kez squinted. Her murals, half dismantled, stood directly between the pylons and the masses. If the towers fell before the lights fired, their concrete might block the beams. If not, thousands would be cognitively seared. No time for committees. Kez sprinted to the nearest mech, scaled its joint like a staircase, and jammed a paint cartridge into the hydraulic input panel. Trigger dust met high voltage. The mech convulsed, then started reciting the Phoenix Library in its grinding baritone. Its arms swung but did not strike, instead carving mid-air letters with hisses of steam, spelling "Shield Us." Pilots tried override codes. The cockpit screens erupted in embedded sonnets. Mech after mech seized up, freezing into accidental barricades. When the forgetting lights discharged, their beams splintered against these story-drunk giants, refracting into harmless auroras that danced over rooftops like illustrated northern lights. Children laughed, reached upward, and the lights painted syllables on their palms. A tide of people surged, dismantling the pylons, scavenging wiring to string makeshift projectors. Everywhere lessons bloomed, elders drawing alphabets in dust, former chant coders converting propaganda billboards into rapid learning charts. The uprising was less a riot than a literacy festival, with occasional sparks of sabotage. By dawn, the ministry's emblem, a closed eye, had been scraped off the Capitol dome and replaced by an open book whose pages were wings. No single leader commanded the movement, yet everyone knew the spark, the girl whose murals spoke. Kez tried to slip away, but crowds waved her forward. They didn't want an idol. They wanted instruction. She spent the morning teaching strangers to shape the letter P with spray cans. News arrived. Outer districts were petitioning to lift the ban. Some garrisons had mutinied. The Ministry Council fled underground, broadcasting threats no one bothered to hear, as city infrastructure itself refused to cooperate. Elevators only rose for writers who could recite yesterday's stanza. Vending kiosks printed coupons redeemable for poems. Rune joked that they'd created not just a rebellion but a grammatical virus. Kez smiled, though exhaustion made her bones hum. Late afternoon, she returned to the Plaza Rebel where the original story began. Milo was there, coaxing a fist-sized drone to trace cursive loops. "Sis," he called. Listen, the rubble vibrated with faint narration still, as if deep inside fractured concrete the Phoenix Library kept reading itself, unwilling to let silence have the last word. Kez knelt, laid her ear against cool stone, and heard a closing line she'd never written. Any cage built to contain imagination becomes the furnace that melts its locks. She looked at Milo. "Did you program that?" He shook his head. "It wrote itself, I think. The story's alive now." Kez felt a shiver of humility. She had thought authorship was control, but found it was release. The words belonged to everyone who carried them forward. They were wings, not chains, and wings decide their own wind. Over the weeks that followed, tribunals erased anti-reading statutes. Former auditors trained as archivists, hunting for remnants of the old world's literature. Children painted alphabet murals on buildings until the skyline looked like a bookshelf tipped horizontal against the sky. And though plenty of work remained, scarcity, grief, the odds of relapse, Dust District no longer felt dusty. It felt drafted, as though the whole city were one manuscript, perpetually revised by collective hands. On the first anniversary of the night the building spoke, citizens gathered where the towers had stood. They projected the resurrected phoenix tale onto drifting smoke balloons, launching them so high they vanished into stars. Kez stood beside Rune and Milo, fingers stained with new ink. A boy tugged her sleeve. "Tell us another story," he pleaded, holding a blank wall like a gift. Kez glanced at the city, humming with restless consonants, and then at the horizon beyond which other zones still slept under the ban. She nodded. "Let's start a sequel," she said, lifting her spray can. Chapter 1. In the beginning, someone listened.